All right, welcome back. So up next, we have our final panel session of the day. This panel session is Security and Compliance in Software Product and Design. Our speakers for today's session are Ihan Tech, Robin Basham, Rob Cuddy, and moderated by Altaz Villani. Altaz, I'll hand it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Raquel. Appreciate it. And folks, thank you very much for taking the time to attend this session today. So let me just quickly share my screen and we'll get started here.
Awesome.
So our session is going to be on security and compliance in software product and design. It's a large topic where we've got software and compliance across the software product and design phases. We'll get into some of the nitty-gritty details on how we're planning to do this, what are some practices. But what I'd like to do first is introduce our panelists, and I'm just going to go down the screen. So I'll start with Rob, then we'll do Ihan, and then I'll ask Robin to introduce yourself. So Rob, you want to start off?
Yeah, it's great to be here, guys. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Rob Cuddy. I'm an application security evangelist for HCL Software. Kind of grew up in the DevOps and DevSecOps space, and I'm excited to talk about addressing this stuff. Should be really fun.
Wonderful. Ihan, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Altas. This is Ihan Tech, and I'm the VP of Information Security at Cyber Electra. My background is in engineering and software development, and happy to be here, Altas.
Great, it's nice to have you. And Robin?
Hi, I'm Robin Basham. I've actually been in this space for 40 years, which is hard to comprehend, but I started early. My company is Enterprise GRC Solutions. Previously, it was Phoenix Business and Systems Process. And I'm very excited to be here. Can't wait to talk about where things are going in this space.
Wonderful. It's nice to have all of you with us today. And my name's Altaz, for those of you that may not know. I work for Security Compass, and my focus is largely on collaboration and working with people outside of the company to try and see what we can do to help us move security and compliance forward. So with that, I would like to ask, as we go through this presentation, please don't hesitate, ask questions, put it in chat. Let's make this interactive. Let's start to see what we can do to help each other out. And with that, let's kick off to talk about the challenges that we currently have with security and compliance when talking about software product and design. And what I wanted to do is, instead of talking about sort of a broad sector and looking at what might be many different things that apply to security and compliance, I wanted to see if perhaps we could break it down and classify it into the design, implementation, deployment, and maintenance and retirement issues. Let's really get down to a level where we can start to see, is there overlap across these areas? Are there some things that are radically different from one area to another, which may be contributing to some of the challenges? So what I'll do is I'll start with Rob, and then I'll go to Robin, and then Ihan, and I'd like to ask you your thoughts. So Rob, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think right off the bat, I go right to design, and the first thing I notice is it's often not there enough. So getting security as a design metric in a lot of places, I think, is the first and foremost challenge. Getting people to think about it up front, right? If we do that, then it becomes a lot easier across the board. But right in that, collaboration becomes an issue. So even in the places where we're doing design, we tend to make assumptions about terminology, about vocabulary, about process. And I think there is a need for a level set that needs to happen there. And do you want to kind of take these individually, or do you want me to kind of go across each of these boxes?
You can speak across as you would like, not a problem.
So I think from the implementation side, I think it gets into a kind of this analysis paralysis piece. We're trying to do too much too soon. And particularly, I think, when we're trying to integrate tool sets into pipelines and things like that. So a really good example of that was a study done at RSA a few years ago, where they found that in this particular company, that going for depth versus breadth actually resulted in more long-term health. And so it was the idea of taking a single team from kind of ground zero to deeper maturity versus getting everybody at the organization to say some arbitrary level one. So I think when you're implementing, right, focus becomes really important in that space, and making sure that we're dealing with things that are top of mind and are going to have real impact so you can see those results quickly. In the deployment, I think we go for perfection. I think we try too hard to make everything great, and a lot of us now are in the DevOps space where good enough is good enough, and so getting something out and getting feedback quickly, we need to do that with security as well, right? And not wait for perfection. And then on the maintenance stuff, we're often adding more rules, more policies, more tools, more information. We don't think about what we need to let go of, and what we need to actually, or the places that we've gotten healthier, can we then do things differently and pivot? So those are just some of the main things that I'm seeing today.
Interesting. And Robin, you want to add your thoughts?
Sure do. And we can just call me Rob too. So I'm just going to get sort of very hypothetical up front and say, if you go back to 2000, we were all very excited about Agile, and Agile was going to give us quite a bit of freedom. And I think today, when you think about design, you need to be careful to not confuse freedom with a lack of consequence. So in the phase of design, we've advanced so far. If somebody comes forward to me and they say, we need to see design and requirements, and our product is going to be 15 different operating systems and components and so on, we can falsely get confident that we can build all the security in up front. But the truth is, right, and I'm going to speak to this a lot more in the hour, with the advent of zero trust, part of what we're identifying is all the different places where we can have consequence. And going back to BitSight, even if you've done a tally of every single asset on the internet, you still haven't looked at the value of people. We've got to the point where we can be data centric. So we have about 5 years of good data centric products and evolution, but we're still not people centric. So my message in the phase of design is we just have the very first STIG for zero trust. We have the very first tying out of zero trust concepts to capabilities, but we don't understand it yet. So rather than go the full cycle, because everybody here is more advanced than me, if I go to the right, I'm going to stick to this theoretical. That's what I want to talk about today.
Yeah, sounds good. Robin, let me just probe a little further. You said we don't focus on people enough. Unpack that for us a little bit. What do you mean?
Oh, thank you for asking. Well, about 4 years ago, working in monitoring, working with the largest data sets in the entire world, I started to ask questions that were community and people-centric. And what I found out quickly was there weren't single stakeholders, enterprises that represented those communities of people. We were just starting to think about individuals and users of systems in terms of, oh, well, it could hurt our brand, it could hurt our reputation. It wasn't until we see CCPA and other in GDPR that we started to see bodies say, we're going to fine you on a per household basis when the consequence, and again, we've got freedom, but we're not thinking about consequence, when the consequence of your choices harm individuals or harm households, groups of individuals. So I find myself looking at all these frameworks that are, they're usually about 10 years behind the tech, which isn't so bad, because in MDM, in medical, it's 20 years behind the tech. But we haven't yet put together the correct controls in the design phase to really look at data as it ties out to individuals as opposed to ties out to assets. Now, I'm not critical of tying out to assets, mind you, I love the presentation we just came out of, but to unpack it a bit, that's what I'm thinking about.
Interesting.
Mhm.
And Ihan, you've got some thoughts on this?
Absolutely. Altai's life is full of challenges, and we can discuss those challenges, life challenges, maybe within an hour. But product kind of just the security challenges, are you kidding me? I mean, those are far greater and more painful than the kind of just the life challenges. Maybe we can kind of spend months, if not years, right? So I'm not going to fall for your trick again over there. Instead of kind of just talking about the challenges, what I would like to talk about is this kind of just how we can overcome the kind of just the challenges that Rob and Robin kind of just mentioned over there, right? So that these kind of just the challenges is not going to be an obstacle, right? And first thing first is security is there to kind of just enable the business, right? And if the business is not there to enable the security, then we cannot talk about the kind of just any security or even the kind of product security over there, right? So you cannot drive a car where the kind of the wheels are not connected to kind of just to the steering wheel, right? For this reason, the executive teams need to kind of just explain the security vision of the organization, right? Once you have this kind of just the high level security vision established, then you need to work on a kind of just the security strategy where there's an alignment with the business goals and the security kind of just the activities, right? So, and while you are doing this, you need to kind of include all of your kind of the stakeholders over there, right? So that you can determine what product security means to your organization, right? And once you have this kind of just a strategy in place, and you are going to articulate this and socialize this kind of just the vision via policy, where the kind of just all the the stakeholders need to understand and kind of just consistently act on it, right? And we don't see these kind of just things, and that's why we are having lots of kind of just the issues in the the life cycle process, like the design, implementation, and deployment, right? So these are kind of just extremely important thing from the kind of just the people perspective that Robin mentioned as well, right? And once you have the kind of just this high level vision and your policy, then you can right now start working on the tactical security plans. Like, how are you going to kind of just govern that vision via your kind of just the standards, process, procedures, and the technology tool stack as well over there, right? And of course, the automation is the key over there. And if you're not kind of just leveraging those automation, right, you're going to kind of fall behind very soon as well, right? So hope I didn't offend you. I didn't talk about any kind of just the challenges, as you can see. The kind
No,
of just
Ihan.
yeah, what needs to be done over there to overcome these challenges is most important.
Absolutely. You just jumped straight ahead to the next slide, which is all good, Ihan. Not a problem.
Right.
So let me ask you something though, Ihan. Now, we've got these things that you've articulated, right? We need to have a vision. We need to have alignment with the vision. We have to build our capabilities. We have to socialize very policies, get our tools and automation in place. Let's probe and let's go deeper into that. Now we're talking about a software supply chain, many moving parts, many different artifacts, many different levels of capabilities. How do we integrate across this variance? Any thoughts? And then what I'll do is I'll flip over once I'm done with you. I'll go to Rob, and then we'll go to Robin and see and get their thoughts for this slide as well. But Ihan, let me start with you. When you talk about having that vision, are you suggesting that the right thing to do then would be to cast the vision across the supply chain, get people to buy into it? What are your thoughts?
Awesome. Of course. I mean, there's a good old saying, Altaz, right? Before you get married, you have to open your eyes wide, right? And after you get married, you have to kind of close at least one of them, if not both, right? And the same thing applies for the kind of just the supply chain security as well. Unfortunately, organizations are not doing this, right? They are kind of just closing their eyes before the engagement. And once they kind of just get engaged, they open wide because there are lots of issues over there, including security kind of just issues. So before the vendor engagement, you need to kind of just establish your supply chain risk management practices over there so that you can govern how you're going to kind of just, assess the security controls, privacy and compliance kind of just the practices of the vendor that you're getting engaged, right? So And you got to do this one in a kind of a bit more smart way as well, because how we are doing today is we are sending the kind of just the questionnaire to the vendor saying that, oh, are you secure? Of course, the vendor saying, yeah, sure, I'm secure, of course. What do you expect, right? So we got to do this one in a more smart way, right? In an automated way and in a continuous way as well.
Interesting. Automating the sort of the compliance and their security posture. Rob, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I actually really like where this discussion is heading, because the thing that's so important to it is what Robin was saying, was the people side of this, and that it doesn't become powerful until it becomes personal. So when we're talking about security being there to enable the business and having that vision across, I think one of the things with the supply chain is we often don't know where all the pieces are, how they fit together, and how we both impact them and are impacted by them. So being able to see those things matters a great deal. And I'll give you a really simple example of this from a couple of years ago, where I was out of the university and I was talking to a group of user experience folks. So it was UX guys, right? So form designs and websites and things like that. And they didn't really care very much about security, didn't think they had anything to do with security. There wasn't really any kind of issue with what they did. And the security parts of the university hadn't really talked to them about anything. And so I just asked them, you're a major university, do you have students in other countries? And they said, sure. And I said, well, do you ever collect data on them? And they said, sure. And I said, well, have you heard of this little thing called GDPR? Right. And for them, the light bulb went off when they realized that they didn't need to necessarily know all the back end code, but when they were connecting their form to a submit button that was then going to go do something, they needed to make sure they were connecting it to the right one. Right. So they just needed to know a couple of basic questions and things like that. And what started as a 10-minute conversation turned into a 90-minute conversation where a guy in the middle of it goes, am I going to go to jail? And I'm like, no, you're fine. Right. But it's that kind of thing of raising the visibility and the transparency so that people can actually see where that is first, because you can't manage what you can't see. So I think that's the first and foremost part when it comes to the supply chain. And I really love that you brought up the point on vendor checklists, because it has to get beyond just that, yes, we have an SBOM and here's our checklist and people just say yes, no to it. There actually has to be some way of validating that those claims that are coming across in the checklist or the bill of materials are what they say they are. So I think those are two really important things right out the gate.
So let me ask you then, Rob. When we talk about raising security awareness across the supply chain teams, are you suggesting then that it would be like your upstream aggregators would then go in and create policies to ensure and training to ensure that our downstream teams are working from a security perspective, that they've got the right mindset, the right metrics to go in there and do this kind of measurement? Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
Well, I think that's part of it. And I think they also have to think through kind of nuances around that. So for example, right, if you're doing offshore development and that happens to be, far away from where you are, or in countries that have different sort of data privacy regulations or other kinds of security compliance testing, they may be doing things that you can take advantage of, but may not be sufficient enough for the environment you're going to use their stuff in. And so having that communication back and forth about what are the things that we need to comply with and what are the things that we need to care about, and the additional regulations. If we deal here in the States, right, as soon as we start crossing state lines, you have varying degrees of data privacy regulations to deal with, whether or not people can be forgotten and whether or not they have the right to request their data and all of those kinds of things. So that impacts the supply chain. So it would be great to have kind of a standard and a baseline to work off of. But I think as a good first pass for them, just even being able to aggregate those things together as the supply chain moves, so you've got one view of it instead of a piece here and a piece here and another piece, and you're trying to pull that together manually. That may be a place where the supply chain itself can get a whole lot healthier, in as we tie bits and pieces of it together, pulling that information together consistently and providing one better view of it goes a long way.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what I heard you say is even after we've ingested some artifact or some code, something that it doesn't negate the fact that there still needs to be some additional testing, perhaps that,
Well,
that needs to be
absolutely.
done, right? So it's like the same thing
Yeah.
with the open source communities. They're part of a supply chain, but and we've got certain things that are being done in open source communities to ensure security, but it may not live up to the expectation of what an organization is expecting, for example, like PCI DSS or something.
Right.
So you take that in, and now you put a layer on top of that, and you say, okay, what are we going to do about this particular requirement that we've got?
Right. Because every organization, with every regulation they have to determine what does it mean to comply with this for them. So there's always going to be that part of the responsibility. But I think there are things we can certainly do to make that part easier, right? The information that's available to them so we can make better decisions off of it.
Yeah, sounds good. Robin, you want to add your thoughts to this as well? And this is all around, integrating.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
So here are some of my thoughts. This is very free form. I'm thinking about how we have software defined perimeters now. And that, and my favorite thing about zero trust, assume nothing, believe nobody, check everything, defeat threats. And that means continuously assume nothing, believe nobody. And what we did was we went from perimeter to having no perimeter. The data is really what we have to protect. So it's data driven. And then we added in OAuth, and we thought that just adding in OAuth was going to give us what we need to be successful. And we weren't really ready to just give up layer 3 and keep people protected. And so now with Executive Order 14028, it's questionable to me if that order is more about protecting industry or about protecting citizens. And I think that as we look at our software and we look at the customer experience and all the feedback that we get in terms of user behavior, I think what we have to do is now we have to challenge where customer behavior sits in our prioritization. Is that shared model still correct? Is it effective? And what kind of liability could be coming back to us? Because like I said, I love the assume nothing, believe nobody. This is where looking at the principles of zero trust really elevates changing what we consider to be part of design. That unique thing that we released, we authorized it and we released that product and we sold that product. We are not free of liability anymore. And it's not just brand, it's specific lawsuits, it's specific loss of people's information, it's aggregated data that is used to harm people. So our responsibilities are not really clearly understood. Okay, just random thoughts.
Yep, all good.
You guys are exciting my mind, and I'm thinking about your work.
That's a great point, though, the aggregated data harming people. It made me think about how with a lot of these types of phishing examples, right, you're getting a little bit of data from a Facebook post and then somewhere from some other social media forum, or then you're looking up their LinkedIn profile and you're pulling all that information together to then do harm. So it's not just one spot, it's several that are all coming together.
Right.
So I want to go a little bit deeper on that, right? So Robin, you've been doing mapping across many different standards and frameworks for a very long time, right?
Yeah.
When we look at the supply chain now, is there a way that we might be able to take a policy? Is it transferable across the supply chain? Are there things that we can talk about that?
Absolutely, sure. You just need 1,000 more people and an additional millennia to get it done, but it's absolutely doable. There are really extensive models in 160 Volume 1 and Volume 2 that take the entire of the 853 Rev 5, and as long as you have a full PMO and you have a full acquisition department, and when you're big, you can afford security. You can indemnify yourself, and you can keep going. Okay, shared responsibility. This is yours. This is mine. We can set scope on assessment. But the reality is so much more is happening today in people's homes, and everything is turnkey and everything is small business. And DFARS is bigger, a lot bigger than FedRAMP. So a lot more people just producing products, throwing it onto Apple, downloading it, putting it into a Docker container. There's a lot more of that going on than we are paying attention to. And this is where individuals get harmed. This is where we see tremendous consequence. You know, we can look at fair, we can look at value. And by one measure on the internet, if you were to research me right this minute, by one measure, where I'm sitting at this moment, I'm worth $240. And by another measure, I'm worth 5 million. Which one's right? If the measure is asking, what kind of harm could I cause? Who do I know? I know some really important people. So if I were to undermine their security, I could cause incredible catastrophic damage. And if all of the electricity in my town goes down, absolutely nobody will notice that I'm gone. So, you know, these measures, I challenge that we've even got the models right. So if you have 1,000 people in 1,000,000 years, my answer is you absolutely get it.
Are there things that we can do to scale this though? Because we don't have 1,000,000 people. We don't have. So what's the answer? Let's talk about how we can bring this down.
Let's bring that in. The answer is let's go back to maturity models, because you know what? Absolutely none of us eat the right thing every day. We do not make our bed every day. So we need maturity models to be healthy. I really like the 5 pillars: identity, device, network, application, workload, and data. I love the pillars. I love the maturity model. And the thing about zero trust is it's sort of like, I think we're evolving to no science. It's like we've been pre-scientific era, and now I see zero trust and I feel like, oh, I'm starting to get some confidence now, because the policy enforcement point is in fact close to the thing that's harmed. I took my phone off the hook so it wouldn't ring, and it just spontaneously is buzzing in the background. I cannot win. So the answer is, I just saw for the first time a model that I thought, okay, this could possibly succeed. It's Scuba. And I'm going to put it into the chat so that we can send it out to everybody else and have a look. So this is the technical reference architecture from CISA and DISA. This is the tying out of capabilities to specific actions and requirements. And I think what I'm looking at, if you look at Scuba and you look at the RMF and roles and responsibilities that traverse the supply chain, roles and responsibilities that traverse different offices. You know, so people say ATO. Well, ATO is a very specific office. But if you look at what I just put in for Scuba, and then you go back to the RMF, and instead of just looking at it as just a bunch of high-level steps, really get into the task level details. There's 47 of them. And the roles and responsibilities, because each role and responsibility has a bunch of bulleted assignments. I think that you could use a risk-based approach and be relatively confident that you were doing the right thing. And by the way, that doesn't remove LDAP. That doesn't remove that, you know, maybe you had 55 different languages that were vulnerable, including firmware, to, you know, speak to what you were mentioning this morning. It doesn't take that away. It just says you need to be consequence driven. You need to follow the data. But by the way, it's not the data, it's the human being that owned it. So people keep talking about data, but they're not talking about the people who own it. And I assure you that we know who owns the data, because we've been making decisions about whether to give you a coupon, whether to let you into something for a long time. So we basically do know who everybody is.
Yeah, and I think this ties into the roles and responsibilities and how we could try and look at risk across the supply chain. And a couple of times, Robin, you've brought up zero trust, and I do want to talk a little bit about this. So I guess I'll pick on Ihan. You've been quiet for a while here. So here, we've got zero trust. We have salsa. We have some of these things that are being discussed when it comes to supply chain security. Now these are not necessarily revolutionary, but we do need our supply chain to keep up with certain security practices that people have sort of come together and said this kind of makes sense. Can you talk, Ihan, from your experience when you look at supply chain security and you look at zero trust, you look at salsa, you look at some of these other things that are out there? They're really endeavoring to try to bring in security in some way to govern the supply chain, right? And as Robin talked about, it's, the EO 14028, for example, was something that also emphasized this. Can you offer your thoughts and your insights based on your experience on what do these emerging security paradigms mean? It will not be the last time we see it, right? But how do we, are there things we can do to manage this, to try to keep it flexible enough so that these things can help us? How does this all work?
Right. And Alta's success depends on the kind of just implementing continuous improvements along with the combination of the emerging technologies, such as the kind of just the zero trust. This is one of them. However, the historical problem with those emerging technologies is that they are usually viewed from too much from the IT perspective and not enough from the kind of just the business perspective or business integration and product development perspective, right? And that kind of thing includes the supply chain over there as well. So currently there is a huge kind of just the missing link between the human talent or the human factor and also the kind of just the paradigms that is being kind of just marketed, such as the zero trust over there. So if you are placing the kind of just the technology or the kind of just these paradigms into the hands of the user community that either doesn't understand how it works or how kind of just it can be leveraged to solve the problems, then you may not be benefiting from the kind of just evolving these security paradigms, be it in a kind of just a product security or from the kind of just the supply chain security as well. So smart organizations recognize the kind of just the potential of those technologies and also kind of just to invest into the people as well who will be using those kind of just technologies. And as part of the CSA, currently we are developing a zero trust training to kind of just to fill this gap, right? There are tons of kind of just technologies and everyone is just claiming that, oh, we are doing the zero trust, right? But what are you doing actually? Actually, we were kind of just, joking just before joining this. And I think that Rob is kind of just asking Raquel, hey, can you kind of just prepare a recipe for the zero trust on this salad example that he gave? Yeah, this is the thing, right? Most of the organizations or most of the vendors are kind of just claiming that they are kind of just, solving all the problems with this zero trust. But when it comes to kind of just understand that and kind of just use wisely, there are not enough guidance over there. Hopefully the CSA, as part of the CSA training that we are bringing the zero trust, this is going to kind of solve some of the problems as well over there.
Yeah, I'm aware that CSA has put up this almost like a center of excellence to try and come up with some practices that we could use to help us. And I think this is another thing, what does it mean? Helping people come alongside is going to be a useful thing. I would like to go down a little bit. When we look at zero trust, assume we've got a really small organization and they're a part of the supply chain. Thoughts, Ihan, on these emerging paradigms? Is it applicable to a small organization? Are there things they can do to remain relevant within the supply chain? Any thoughts that you have on that?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I mean, as long as you're kind of just doing this with a kind of just the intent of, the building the security in, right? You can always leverage those kind of just emerging technologies, be it a kind of just a big organization or small organization, right? And the idea is kind of just, as I mentioned, to the Robin's point, is kind of just the people-centric. It should be the kind of the people-centric, and it could be kind of just to the front of the to the business centric as well, instead of kind of just too much on IT. If you put too much kind of just to the the effort on the IT side, you're going to lose the kind of just the track of what value those emerging technologies are bringing to you, right? So be it a kind of just to the big organization or small organization, they can always leverage these kind of zero trust and the similar kind of just paradigms over there. This is coming. Right. The key is how to kind of just use that. Is the kind of just the challenging question over there, right? It may not be very obvious to find that answer.
Yeah, and I think what seems to be recurring in this discussion that we're having today is, we need the ability to go in there and have some policy, and it may be driven by a zero trust mindset. But when we go and we start to develop components, and these components go in and they get aggregated across the supply chain, then it really is, how do we go in for this particular organization? How can we get it so that it's tailored to the way that they function and the role that they play within the supply chain, right? Like taking it, what you have in a for what an aggregator would do, for example, doesn't make sense to take that and pull it down to where you've got someone that's actually developing the components themselves. But nevertheless, when you get to that stage, there will be certain requirements that need to be met so that we can test it according to zero trust principles, for example, as we kind of go higher up within the supply chain. Rob, I'd like to get your thoughts on this too, handling these emerging security paradigms that are, where people are trying to help us secure our supply chain. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I'm glad that we're talking about kind of the people and behavior side of this too, and especially I think this shows up in smaller organizations. We tend to assume that an individual has a given role and that role is in perpetuity, right? If they're a developer or a tester or an aggregator, right? And more often than not, in different contexts, they have different roles, but it's the same individual who is now trying to be in that system. And so balancing that out becomes really tricky, and figuring out how do we determine both the access and the authorization pieces with zero trust. And I find that they tend to get blended a little bit. But I think that's part of the discussion in being able to have better understanding of the context that I'm currently in when I'm part of that supply chain. And even, you can even think about it too, traditional software development, you can think of as a supply chain, right? If we're moving through traditional stages and delivering things through. And so, how do we handle people in the context of the environment they're in and be able to determine what they can then do while they're there? I think the smaller you are, the more likely it is you're going to run into this cross blending of roles. And even simple examples of making people continually sign into environments, even though we're supposed to have single sign-on, right? And the juxtaposition, they get confused, that kind of thing. So making it better for them to understand, hey, I've now gone to this project, I'm this role in that thing. Can you figure that out ahead of time? Is there a way to establish that context, prove it up front? That's the flexibility piece that I think it becomes really, really important. And if we do that well, I think it helps a whole lot better with us seeing what we need to manage, pulling all that stuff together, forcing us to identify what's really important in that process, and protect it better.
Interesting. And Robin, you had talked previously about the governance model around all of this. So we've got we don't want to just focus on IT issues. We want to bring in business issues. We want to focus on continuous improvement. Great, good to know. Good to see. How do we?
Let me just pass a resource in so it gets to the group as you're closing this out.
Yep.
This is a resource when you think about how finally in 853 Rev 5, NIST determined that for the RMF, they would put privacy into its own silo, and they attributed 97 out of the entire of the 298 controls to be associated to privacy. That's a pretty big number. And what I think is going to happen is we're going to end up with a ZTA maturity, and we're going to add an attribute to everything that we look at to ask, in what aspect does this meet ZTA for identity, device, network, application, workload, and data? So I think that's what's going to happen, is we're going to evolve a little bit forward. And if you're very small, you will answer it in the context of what that product is doing.
So are you suggesting that we would tag these attributes to the policies, to the requirements, to both?
To both. And then, you know, if you look at Scuba, which just came out again, you know, where it's got the assignment of responsibilities to capabilities based on the expectations. I think that we're finally getting close enough to say, well, how do we do security when the product isn't within, you know, the confines of an enterprise? So
let me ask you something, Robin. So we're developing a product, and you know, this product is again consists of a supply chain. We go in and we know that we've got all these requirements, and we start to tag these requirements based on, say, zero trust principles, for example, or it might be asset classification, for example. Would it make sense to go in and to say, okay, for this organization in this part of the supply chain, let's filter out all the other requirements and let them focus on just this part of the initial portfolio of requirements? And if so, how do we manage all that? Like, do we need to get the right integrations across the supply chain?
yes.
You know, how does that all sort of function? Because we ultimately want to produce one product. We've got just so many hands touching this. We're going to tag this on the policy level. We're going to tag this at the asset level. So would it mean, for example, if we've got a supplier that focuses on the data tier in some capacity, then they need to make sure that the requirements related to the data tier are immediately relevant to them, and we can provide that to them. Because I see that as being part of the problem right now, is we haven't been able to clearly articulate to the supply chain vendors, what should I specifically be focusing on when it comes to the requirements, right? So are there ways that we could go in and we might be able to do this in a scalable way, you know, without having to develop a, you know, 1,000-person team?
Yes, but I think we're going to have to, you know, the best engineers, the greatest innovators are people who can let go, who are willing to say, you know, I used to be able to do this, but then I stopped doing it because there was a better approach. So I made something up earlier today, and somebody keyed in on it, which was, why isn't data biodegradable? But that wasn't a new concept. You know, I used to work with EMC, and EMC was all about the deduplicating and the life cycle and the retirement of data. I think what's going to happen with zero trust is we're going to come to terms with the fact that even though we've managed to propose a shared responsibility for every type of architecture that we know of at this moment, that it's not working. Because not everybody understands it, because it doesn't transfer with the human that is using the product. And what we have to do is, we did it for privacy. Now we have to look at, we need to continuously look at the use case that a human being is associated to something all across the supply chain. And what's reasonable for me to hand off as I go from this contract to that contract? What is reasonable in terms of the loss of confidentiality for a person, or the loss of availability, or the harm to their reputation, or unfair business practices within that product? Now, I'm focusing on that because I'm so blown away by the accomplishments of the other people on this panel that I don't want to step in their domain and look foolish. So I'm deliberately speaking about stuff that they don't.
Sounds good. So Ayhan, Rob, do you have any other final thoughts on this?
Again, I think having people understand where they fit first, right, becomes, to me, kind of the key in making it real, right? If I'm personally impacted, if the people around me are personally impacted, if we see how we're making that better, and when we were talking about having a 1,000-person team, my mind kind of naturally went to, well, who's coming up, right? Is this stuff that we are talking about at the university level, in the schools, in building out those skills? And I love what Robin was saying, is that we have to be able to let go. And I think that includes methods that were great 15, 20 years ago, but aren't applicable in a cloud environment where things are scaling massively. So being able to think through not just as we're doing it ourselves, but who are we bringing along with us as part of the process, I think is an important piece here in that human part of the supply chain. I had a good CISO friend of mine explain it to me one day, where he goes, when we were doing this, we came along and we were doing everything and figuring it all out, but we didn't leave any breadcrumbs behind us, right? And so there's this gap now that we all talk about in being able to get other people connected. But they're folks that are going to be continually impacted by the supply chain and are going to have to secure it as they're growing forward. So we have to be able to think about not just fixing it now, but how are we transferring that, and how are we training up the folks behind us to be able to take that over too.
Yeah, that's a really important point, I think, because now we're talking about constructing a knowledge base, which we could then use and query that knowledge base to say, what do we need to do based on the experience that people that came before us, or maybe it's from standards or frameworks. How do we take this stuff in and make it actionable for the stuff that we need to do today? And if that gap is there, then we're just going to repeat the same thing again, and that essentially slows down the supply chain. So that becomes an important artifact that we need to carry through and make sure that we've got people that not only are trained, but are able to take those best practices and codify them within their context as well. What I'd like to do now is let's talk about kind of going forward. So I'd like to take a situation where we've got an organization that now has a supply chain, and they would like to begin to build in these security practices so that the products that they produce are in fact secure. What might be some of the landmines, some of the issues that they would face from your experience that you would caution them about? And I'll start with Ayhan, and then I'll go to Rob, and then we'll go to Robin. So Ayhan, you want to take a stab at this? What might be some things that you would advise an organization that has a supply chain to try and watch out for?
Right. There are a couple of things. Whatever you are doing, whether it's a kind of product development or the other kind of just the activities, needs to be business centric. Business needs to be kind of just integrated in that, right? And also you need to kind of just sort of provide them a kind of sort of capability where each stakeholder can kind of contribute to the security of the kind of just sort of product, whatever that they're developing, right? And also from kind of just to the activities perspective, whatever you're doing, it needs to be timely, right? Because we see lots of kind of just practices within the kind of just the life cycle that is kind of just either taking too much time or is not even being completed in a timely manner, right? So there are kind of just a couple of ways how you can handle that timeliness over there as well. And another thing, whatever you are doing, security is not a static thing, right? It's a dynamic thing. It needs to be continuous over there, right? And you need to kind of just architect your activities in such a way that whatever the security activities that you are putting over there is going to be continuous and the compliant as well, right? If you are especially bound to some certain kind of just regulatory requirements. Another thing that you need to do is kind of just consistent, right? Whatever you are doing, again, be it a risk assessment, threat modeling, or kind of just the security architecture, it needs to be consistent, and where you can kind of just leverage some of the automations to become consistent on those activities, right? And if you cannot kind of just measure something, most probably you will not be able to manage that. That's why security is measurable. You need to kind of just measure things. You need to collect some metrics so that you can see how your kind of just the program is just kind of just improving, right? And it could be kind of just the dynamic that we kind of just talk about, especially from the risk assessment perspective, right? It is extremely important that it needs to be dynamic, right? I mean, you did your risk assessment, and after 5 minutes, since threat landscape or vulnerability landscape is kind of just changing dramatically, you need to kind of find a way to get that intelligence and put this one into your kind of just security activities over there as well. And last but not least, it needs to be customized, right? Because there is no such thing as a kind of a silver bullet. You can take it and kind of just put this and expect that this is going to kind of work for everything. No, you need to kind of just customize some of the activities in a kind of just a very smart way. I see lots of organizations that they are doing, for example, risk assessment, right? And still they are doing this in an old fashion. I mean, hey, it's a web application, but we do have IoTs. We do have other kind of just new emerging technologies. So you got to change your kind of just way of kind of thinking and doing things a bit as well. Altas.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think when you were talking about, excuse me, when you were talking about things like making it timely so that it can be completed. So you're suggesting that when we put something in, we give it enough time to propagate through the supply chain. Let's get everybody to kind of follow this, and then if something goes wrong, let's learn from it, right? So we've got an upstream supplier might look at a downstream supplier and be like, hold on, this is not quite fitting right. Let's go back, let's fix it again. And therein lies the opportunity to build in now some checks and balances when then you start to automate and check and see whether that actually works over time. You also talked a little bit about the threat landscape changing. So there may be some suppliers, for example, may use Austin tools or have something in their SIEM that might say, hey, this is becoming an issue for us, but we think there's a downstream supplier that perhaps can help us with something like this. I think the challenge in here is sort of a cost-benefit trade-off. Do we do that? Do we get the downstream supplier to work on that? Is it going to be cost effective for them? So a lot of these kinds of dynamics begin to emerge now across the supply chain. And a lot of what I'm hearing as well is, how do we trust the output from various suppliers? This is becoming a real issue now, and it's based not just on the fact that they attest to the fact that they are secure, but can we verify it? Are there other variables that we can put around the delivery mechanisms to provide us with greater assurance that what we're building into our supply chain is in fact going to be as secure as we want? And third-party attestations and stuff might be one way, for example. So let me just sort of stop my own rambling at this point, and let me quickly flip over and let's go to Rob. Rob, your thoughts? Any advice that you would be willing to give to someone that is looking to secure their supply chain?
Yeah, and we're known for rambling, so that's all right. I appreciate it, my friend. Yeah, I really like the couple of comments here too, and the juxtaposition of timely and continuous, because that's exactly where my mind is at. That the one thing here is plan on being in it for the long haul, right? This is really, when we think about security, right, it's the same sort of way what we do with our parenting sometimes. It's really about the journey, not as much the destination, right? We're trying to get healthier, trying to get more secure. There's always going to be more threats. So it is kind of a long haul play, but there are things you can do now that have impact, and taking those steps, right, and doing those things, checking the policies, getting a good inventory, understanding the chain, and realizing you don't have a supply chain, you have probably dozens of them, right? There's no single chain, and the point on customization there, I think, is really spot on. I think the other thing that's really important to this, and we've talked a lot about the human side of it, but humans like to be told that they've done a really good job. They like to celebrate. They like to be able to see where they're winning. And so I would say plan on celebrating those small wins rather than waiting for perfection. If you wait 6 months to have a big bang and say, hey, we're much more secure, well, there's people who are going to lose sight along the way, right? So celebrate the small wins, find places where you can call out success, and that'll bring other people on board having to do that. And I think plan on having to say the same thing multiple times in different ways. We all learn differently, right? Some of us are great and love this kind of a format where we're seeing things typed as we're hearing somebody listen. There's others of us that need to get our hands on something. There's others of us that just need to sit one-on-one with somebody. but plan on that kind of repetition so that you can communicate the message out effectively to that organization. And that may mean getting a little bit creative with how you choose to communicate things, right? It's not just, simple phishing attacks or, examples in an email or a single training course that lasts for 30 minutes, right? If we're really going to do this well, we've got to find multiple ways to get it in front of folks. And then I think the final part of that is, in all of that stuff, there's going to be places where it goes wrong, right? There's bumps in the road. There's going to be issues. And so I would say intentionally build in times where you're focusing on dealing with that kind of stuff and anticipate that. And, if you're not already pulling in places in your development cycles, in your release cycles, where you pause and go, hey, we're going to fix that thing over there, right? Maybe we've had a bunch of low security issues that for years we've just kept tagging as low priority because they weren't really that critical. But I think what we've seen with recent events in like Log4j and the Spring Shell is these things that we thought were really good for a long time, suddenly there's a use case or a usage that explodes them. And so we have to have those concerted times where we pay attention to issues like this and we say, we're going to drive it out. We're going to have a day where we're going to do something like that. I think if we start to do those things, it becomes more ingrained in the culture. And when we can get security in the culture, we all win.
Interesting. And Robin, do you have some thoughts on this as well?
Sure, and 60 seconds because we need to clear the runway for the next group. I'm going to go back to the other side of my split personality and say, it's never a bad thing to properly execute a SOC 2 report and to take the time to document and honor what the engineering and the software development and the security programs are doing. And it's never a bad thing to do the SPRS process, to do your self-reporting and scored reporting to get into the DFARS system. If your product has any data in the cloud, you're going to either be looking at CUI requirements. If it's not federal data, it's going to be CUI. And if it is federal data, then it's going to be FedRAMP. These processes will not take the place of what a product like Security Compass offers, the SDE elements. It's not going to replace SDE. SDE is going to be part of that collection of artifacts and processes that were measured and reported against to earn those certifications. So you really should do both. You can't get by simply doing a point in time report where you tell people that you're secure, because you're not. And right. You can't just have everything be agile, leave it up to the engineers and never stop and report and check. You have to do both. And it's been a pleasure to meet you guys. I like being Rob too. That was fun.
And with that, I would just like to thank our panelists. It's been a great conversation today. We're just looking at the supply chain and the issues. So Rob, Ihan, Robin, thank you very much. And to all of you who also participated in listening in on our conversation, thank you so much. Please feel free to reach out to us. We're on LinkedIn. More than happy to continue this discussion. If you've got thoughts, you've got anything else that you want to inject in, please, not a problem. And with that, I'd like to bring this session to a close. Thanks, everybody.